Hello, the Crack Mirror, Chapter 1, Egalitarianism and the Social Sciences in India. The recent debate involving some of the more sensitive scholars in the pages of Economic and Political Weekly has drawn attention to the problems that surround the future of social sciences discipline in India. This intervention covers various dimensions of the malady of social science. For example, Ramchandra Guha underscored the absent liberal in the social sciences, while Partha Chatterjee underlined the colonization of social science by certain metropolitan centers in the country. This claim, particularly Guha's, have been contested on nuanced ground by scholars like Peter D'Souza. The present paper argued that the introduction of the principle of egalitarianism into the debate seeks to extend and not undermine Guha's, D'Souza's and Chatterjee's criticism of social science practice in India. The principle of egalitarianism, as we shall spell out in the greater detail in the following sections, have become relevant in the context where the social sciences are divided into empirically inferiorized and the critically privileged domain of knowledge. As the last 50 to 60 years of academic experience with the Indian social science shows, social science practice in India has harbored a cultural hierarchy dividing it into the vast inferior mass of academics, both pursue empirical social science and the privileged few who are considered the theoretical pundits with reflective capacity that make them intellectually superior to the former. The use to use a more familiar analogy, Indian social sciences represent a pernicious divide between theoretical Brahmin and empirical Shudra. This pernicious dichotomy indicates the lack of egalitarian condition in social sciences practice in the country. This chapter is divided into four sections. The first deal with the justification of egalitarian principle for critiquing the practice of social science. This would, of course, include a critique of the cultural hierarchies that operate through the certain academic and institutional structures. In the second section, an attempt is made to discuss the conditions that seems to adversely affect the growth of reflective capacity within the intellectually deprived groups such as Dalit, tribals, and even OBCs, other backward caste. This section addresses the question of why certain groups lack this capacity as the primary condition for doing social science at a more abstract theoretical level. This would include analysis of factors that have a bearing on the possibility of reflective capacity. The third section concerns moral stamina as the necessary condition for doing theory. In the final section, an attempt is made to critique the theoretical claims that have been made on behalf of Dalits by non-Dalits and to carry out a moral critique of intellectual representation of Dalit issues in the social science in India. The egalitarian principle and social science practice. It is argued here that the egalitarian principle provides both moral opportunity as well as the capacity to interrogate the exclusionary in terms of the purity pollution divide and agrahara, the exclusive dwelling space of top of the twice born nature of social science practice in the country. Moreover, it also provides normative direction to alternative modes of reorganizing the boundaries of social science so as to make them more inclusive. The reorganization of social science on egalitarian lines seeks to question the gatekeeping by some. The egalitarian principle thus is both interrogatory and suggestive. This can be justified by providing the following reasons. First, the egalitarian principle has a capacity to bring out within the practitioners of social sciences a sense of moral responsibility that would force the latter to offer a justification as to why she is privileging a particular social science language, say, of only theory over the empirical description of particular phenomena under investigation. To put it differently, egalitarianism would interrogate all kinds of intellectual modes for their arbitrariness. For example, the egalitarian principle in social sciences would not accept the following explanation. One has an innate ability to do only theory. Doing theory is a part of one's natural dispositions, and one is privileged to do only theory because one has been born from the thinking head of pure bodies. Second, and corollary to the first, the egalitarian import therefore basically integrate the hierarchical division that suggests that some are born with theoretical spoon in their mouth and the vast majority with the empirical pot around their neck. Here, the analogy of the pot is suggestive of the social evil that was expressed through an earthen pot tied around the neck of untouchables during the Peshwa rule in the 19th century Maharashtra. The untouchable were forced by the Brahminical state to tie this pot around their neck so that they could spit in the pot and thus save the space around them from getting ritually polluted. Other the Prakash were free to spit anywhere but not the Dalits. To emphasize the absurdity of the issue, we could say that the Peshwa rule did not promote democracy in spitting, as is the case in contemporary India. Third, the egalitarian principle would also integrate the epistemological imperialism that empower non-Dalit or tribal to launch intellectual expedition to conquer new epistemological territories that belong to the Dalit or Adivasi intellectual universe. The egalitarian principle would puncture this modernist overconfidence by questioning on moral ground the competing element that renders every field of knowledge a free zone of investigation that can be taken over by anyone who follow the ground rules, procedure and protocol that are devised by the gatekeepers of the social sciences. Thus, the egalitarian principle undermines the competitive model of doing the social sciences. It would put moral pressure on the modernists to keep up some field of knowledge that might get better intellectual treatment from the other. The interrogatory dimension also has a bearing on the suggestive thrust of the egalitarian principle. The interrogatory character of the egalitarian principle fundamentally opposes all forms and contexts of formal exclusion from the field of intellectual inquiry. The egalitarian import into understanding social sciences practice in India is suggestive for the following reason. First, it would not approve of judge argument like one cannot demand equal treatment in all fields of intellectual pursuit. Similarly, it would not approve of the intellectual position that some field of inquiry must be left free for the specialist. Secondly, the egalitarian principle would not approve of rigid ground rules, procedure, and protocol that are restrictive in nature. Further, the egalitarian principle, at least at the theoretical level, offer a promise to those cultural groups whose entry into the intellectual field has been historically prohibited by social forces in India. For example, one of its epistemological variants can render the field of knowledge, both theoretical and practical, as the epistemology of social action, communicable across cultural border, with person of any intellectual background in principle capable of utilizing it. Thirdly, this kind of egalitarianism presupposes a possibility of a common stock of concept and category that are equally available for use and even misuse by person from any caste or social origin. It only suggests that the epistemological field in itself does not establish a copyright for certain cultural group to control categories. On the contrary, it would question the politics of naming categories or assigning boundaries to intellectual practice in an arbitrary manner. It is in this sense that the egalitarian principle promises to undermine the dominant epistemological practices that are not only exclusionary but also authoritarian in their intention and tend to become a force that seeks to discipline, denigrate, and even deny the epistemic status to certain concepts and categories that do not fall in the line with the intellectual discovery that feed on cultural hierarchy as a hegemonic necessity. Theory as an authoritative practice has destructive implication, particularly for the young scholar who in Their desire to follow the authoritative academic personality sacrifice their insight that can flourish outside the authoritative intellectual practice. In other words, without the egalitarian principle, hegemonic social science practice might make a lot of negative differences to cultural groups such as Dalit and Adivasi. As an intellectual force, this kind of hegemonic practice would lead to caricaturing of the Dalit or Bahujan epistemologically dumb, push them into empirical ghettos, or confine their intellectual or theoretical ambition to the dominant methodological modes to a significant degree. Thus, the lack of genuine egalitarian principle within mainstream social science practice, as we shall argue later, would crush the confidence of the marginalized Dalit Adivasi, lower their self-esteem, and humiliate them through epistemological patronage or charity. In this context, it is necessary to ask the question whether we have followed the egalitarian principle in the practice of social sciences. The answer to this question cannot be given in the affirmative. On the contrary, it is possible to give a very mixed answer. Scholars have failed to address this question squarely. Instead, they have lamented the falling standard of social science practice, particularly its theoretical components. Thus, it is suggested that there is a poverty of political theory in India. While these are valid observations, they do not comment on authoritative and intimidating character of social science practice in the country. What is ironical is that the lamentation has been about the shrinking social base of political theory in India, not so much about the content and form of theory. The authoritarian character did not attract scholarly attention even in the recent report on social science research in India. This chapter argues that social science practice in India is still exclusive and undemocratic in character. It is self-serving and self-satisfying as well. It lacks a genuine egalitarian character. Social science discourse in India is being closely disciplined by self-appointed juries who sit in the apex court and decide what is the correct practice according to the canons. These juries decide what is the theory and what is the trash. It is a significant matter. It is a different matter that these canons lack authenticity as they are borrowed from the West rather unconditionally. The apex court in social science, with its full bench in Delhi, keep ruling out subaltern objection as absurd and idiosyncratic. At worst, and emotional, descriptive, empirical, and polemical at the best. Among other things, bridgehead methodology is deployed by the juries to silence dissenting voices that are questioning this cultural hierarchy, and are threatening to offer alternative idea of social science. However, as we shall see in the following sections of this chapter, Dalit or the Bahujan have been finding it less motivating to invest in an alternative imagination of social sciences in India. Social context of intellectual hierarchies. Any discourse, including the social sciences, emerges within a specific material and social context. In other words, it is a material context with appropriate conditions that shape reflective ability among individual or groups. What was the material context that would have prompted the lead to go for experimentation, innovation, and imagination? Skill occupation do facilitate a certain degree of innovation among their members. Generation of knowledge takes place basically in the labor process. It is the labor process that creates the concrete possibilities for such epistemological abilities, but reflective abilities develop only in a certain kind of labor processes. For example, if the labor processes are imaginative, innovative, and interesting, then they would provide sufficient scope for the agent to reflect continuously on the tools of production. The progressively transforming labor process unfold umpteen opportunity for reflective capacities. The intellectual history of the West is proof enough in this regard. In India, the social groups, particularly the artisan caste, who were forced, if not privileged, to handle labor processes with innovation, could produce innovative knowledge system. But certain groups like the Dalit who did not form part of the organic labor processes ultimately failed to develop an intellectual capacity to reflect. By and large, they were always kept out of such a social context. Generation after generation, they were pushed into occupations that were completely devoid of any possibility of innovation and imagination, and hence were not impregnated with any possibility of knowledge. For example, they were pushed regularly into occupation like scavenging, sanitation, and other types of manual labor that had inherent limitation in preventing them from doing anything extraordinary in terms of creating knowledge. Until the arrival of modernity in India, particularly with independence, Dalits were not included in the differentiated sphere of production that offer the context for imagination. In other words, ghettoization into inferiorized manual sphere, reflecting the closed character of society, resulted in a loss of the confidence that is so important in developing the theoretical potential of the social sciences. In the Indian context, these occupations were alienating and humiliating and stall any possibility of imagination or innovation within the Dalit communities. Thus, before independence, the Dalit look lack both the context and conditions, differentiated spheres of production, both intellectual and material, and dis- destigmatized occupation are necessary for acquiring intellectual caliber and confidence. After independence, labor processes did offer differentiated sphere for the Dalit, but they did not create sufficient conditions that made reflectivity possible. We shall discuss this point in a greater detail later. Suffice it to say that lack of condition stall the growth of any reflective faculty among Dalits. Dalits who may have had reflective capacity but could not develop them. They were denied the conditions that are necessary for the development of reflective faculties. One of the crucial conditions of reflectivity is the availability of freedom. Freedom from the immediate context is absolutely necessary for making the sense of the immediate at an abstract general level. It is necessary to make connection through the vast body of detail that are embodied into the immediate. Freedom is also necessary to seek detachment from the immediate for illumination at a general level. If one does not enjoy the freedom and is completely trapped in the ceaseless struggle for survival, one is hopelessly handicapped in developing any reflectivity. Ultimately, it is those with economic security who can pursue philosophy and theory in the formal sense of the terms. The rest are forced to do only the empirical side of social science. Ambedkar himself had realized the need for such freedom and took time off to detach himself from the immediate shawl working class tenement life in Bombay and went to different places of higher learning abroad. But he was not as fortunate as others to enjoy steady support from the intellectual circles that existed during his time. His reflectivity flourished almost like Eklavya's. What necessary are feedbacks from liberal interlocutors, support from institutions with strong tradition of solid theoretical research, and financial support that might help the scholar to pursue the academic agenda at more abstract level and more meaningful and dignified terms. Scholarship programs are not enough to provide material security for the Dalit for two reasons. First, they are meagre, and second, they do not guarantee the jobs that are so crucial for any reflectivity. Along with these conditions, the resources of the community, along with historically accumulated intellectual resources, assure a congenial cultural context, making one's choice of theoretical research look natural. Members of the twice born communities are fortunate to enjoy this condition both in India and abroad. The Dalit lack these community resources.